All right, hello officially, everybody. Welcome near and far via Zoom and Facebook. I'm Megan Marshall, and I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers Series. This is our penultimate event of the semester, and I'm very excited to welcome our featured guest, who is both an accomplished author and editor. But before I introduce him, I do want to make sure to thank all of those who have helped to make this event possible, and that includes Markle Tumlin, my amazing co-host, and our other friends from Love Library, Danya Muka Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. And I'd like to thank Instructionally Related Activities and the Department of English and Comparative Literature for their continued support of this series. Just a couple reminders, if you're joining us via Zoom, please keep your mic muted during the presentation. And know, as you heard, that this event is being recorded and live streamed. If you'd like to review the recording after the event has concluded, in addition to a lot of other great living writers related content, and we're going to be adding a lot of exciting stuff soon. So you'll definitely want to check out the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers series on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to throw that link into the chat in just a minute. You're definitely going to want to subscribe. And a bit later, if you have them, you're going to have a chance to ask some questions. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our featured author for the evening. Eric Nguyen earned an MFA in creative writing from McNeese State University in Louisiana. He has been awarded fellowships from Lambda Literary, Voices of Our Nation Arts, and the Tin House Writers Workshop. Things We Lost to the Water, which he'll be reading from and discussing tonight, is his first novel. Nguyen is also the editor-in-chief of diaCRITICS, which is an organization that highlights art, literature, and stories from writers, artists, and culture makers of the Vietnamese and Southeast Asian diaspora. Things We Lost to the Water is the multi-layered narrative of an immigrant Vietnamese family that settles in New Orleans and struggles to remain connected to each other and to their heritage. The recurring motif of water runs like a current throughout the novel, representing each character's unique journey and all that has been attained and lost, as water is wont to be unpredictable in its power to both sustain life and destroy it. Of this brilliant debut, author Matthew Salas's raves. In precise, exquisite sentences, Nguyen details the emotional lives of three family members over decades of struggle, survival, and joy. Things We Lost to the Water is a masterpiece, an arrival, an expression of love from a beautiful and necessary new voice. So please join me in giving a warm welcome, all the hand clapping emojis, to Eric Nguyen.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you, Megan, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited, even though I can't be in San Diego. I see a lot of recommendations in the comments for the next time, the first time I'll be there. So I'll make sure to check it out.
Taking your shoes off.
So I guess I can first read part of the novel, and then I can talk more about my journey into writing the novel, and maybe talk about, I guess, what I wish I knew before I wrote a novel, before I came on this journey to be, I guess, a published author, because I know there are writers in this group, and I just feel like the writing world, like, it's closed off, like you don't know how to get into it. So yeah, so I'll just get started. I'm reading in the middle of the book. It's from the book is from the perspective of three characters. We have a mother and her two sons. And basically what happens at the beginning is that they flee Vietnam because of the post-war era. It was a dangerous time for people who used to be in basically what was the Republic of South Vietnam. By accident, the father or the husband of the family, he got left behind, and now the mother and two sons have to find a way to settle in their new home in New Orleans. And it goes from 1978 to 2005, and their journey throughout the years was finding their place in this new country of theirs. So this chapter is from the second son's perspective. His name is Ben, and I guess this is the first chapter that you meet him. from his perspective. And this is also when a stranger comes to the neighborhood that his mother does not completely trust. So it's 1987. Most of Versailles was Catholic. There was one Buddhist family long ago, but they moved away. Where do we belong? Ben's mother would ask. It happened after every Mardi Gras. After the streets were clean of streamers, the king cakes eaten, the tiny plastic baby tossed out the trash, though Ben always wanted to keep them, and the beads packed away for the next year, a tangled mess no one would use again. Versailles became quieter, calmer, more severe. On Sundays, the neighbors, the femmes, the Moles, the Nguyens, dressed up for church, the women in plain aliyahs, and the men in button-ups tucked into their pants. Are you going to Ash Wednesday service? They asked Ben's mother. What about Palm Sunday? What fish dinners? Do you have any new and exciting ways to cook fish? Fish on Fridays? His mother was offended. Leave me and my children alone, she seemed to say, with her eyes, though it would have been too rude to say that out loud. She learned the new phrase from one of her customers at the nail salon, bless your heart, which meant secretly that they were dumb or lacking mental faculties or otherwise impaired. But there was not a thing to be done about it, how pitiful they were, how one could pity them all day long until the cows came home. She said to them all the time, bless your heart, bless your heart, bless your heart. From February to April, Ben's mother tried not to talk to anyone in Versailles if she could help it. After work, she would walk to their apartment. If her breath held in, her posture rigid, her eyes down. A year without talking about Easter or Lent was a successful year. She would say to both of them, Ben and his brother, their family was never one for ideologies, she would say, and the father would have been against it all. Catholicism or communism, it would have been all the same to him. Ben never knew his father. He was killed, according to his mother, after the war. The war, from what he had gleaned from books and TV, had been between communism and non-communists. The Americans came to help the fight against communists. His own father was not a communist, he was a teacher and a free thinker who despised the communists. And because of this, they killed him. He died a hero. That was the word his mother used, hero, whenever Ben asked about him. Whatever else he knew of the man were echoes of would-haves and could-haves. He would have thought this. He could have done this. Your father, not a real-life father, but a ghost of a father, an after image of a father. That's why we don't live in Vietnam. We live in America. Should we continue? Where we can think what we want and not get arrested. Last year, they became citizens. One of two families in the neighborhood so far. It was something she took pride in. Ben didn't know what it meant, how their lives would be different than before, but he knew it was something important, momentous. That night they ate cake from Gambino's. The summer between third and fourth grade, as the sun was setting one evening, a priest arrived in Versailles. He had a dark blue car with wood grain panels. No one recognized it, and at first everyone stuck out their heads out their windows to have a look. When the priest stopped, he carried a large stack of door hangers. He began his journey door to door. Ben could hear his fists on wood every few minutes, at first hard and vivacious, but as the night continued, it became softer, quieter. By the time he arrived at the last apartment, their apartment, they didn't hear his knock and knew he was there only because they were expecting him. He introduced himself as a priest who had come from Houston by way of Saigon to set up a brand new church in New Orleans, a very special church, a Vietnamese church would also be a community center and a safe place for everyone. Imagine ping pong tables, he said, in basketball courts, in classrooms for classes, English lessons for adults, Vietnamese lessons for kids. The priest looked at Ben, who stood behind his mother at the door. Ben smiled and he held his hands behind his back. His mother didn't look like she was paying attention. That's the dream anyway, explained the priest, the almighty willing. Right now we rent a storefront off Chef Mentir next to a Winn-Dixie. Ah, Winn-Dixie, his mother said, as if out of everything she was told, this was the one thing she understood. She looked at one side of the door hanger and flipped it to the other, but at the motion of it, the paper, thick like cardboard, so it would stay put on all the doorknobs, sliced her finger. In the next instant, the hanger flew out of her hands and dropped off the landing. She whispered as if she didn't want anyone to hear. She turned around and walked to the kitchen sink. Ben moved out of the way, so intent she seemed to get there. The priest came running after her. I am so sorry, Go. So very sorry. Ben closed the door because he wanted to be helpful. The priest was younger than Ben expected. On TV, when you saw a priest, they were always chubby, old, pale men who mumbled when they spoke. But this priest was skinny, with golden brown skin and a thick head of hair. And of course, he was Vietnamese. You never saw Vietnamese priests on TV. You never saw Vietnamese anything. A Vietnamese priest in real life, that was amazing. His mother ran the water over her finger as the priest stood by. He kept on apologizing, and his mother was obliged to keep on telling him, annoyed, it was no one's fault. She rummaged around the drawers for a bandage. They kept their first aid in the last drawer, but she kept looking elsewhere in her frenzied state. Let me help, the priest said. No, thank you, his mother said when she found the box of bandages. She emptied it onto the counter. They were all different sizes, so she had to look through them before finding the right one. The priest left after that, telling her she should consider joining the congregation, Our Lady of Saigon. They could come to mass tomorrow or Sunday, or any time really, he said. Our doors are always open. We're here to serve the community. His mother didn't answer. We hope to see you, the priest repeated as she closed the door. Catholics, she proclaimed after watching his car pull away. They can believe whatever they want, but that doesn't mean they can go around telling you what to think or do or believe. She opened her eyes wide at him as if she was about to say something important, a lesson he should learn and take note of. That's why we left Vietnam, you see? But you left Vietnam because of the communists, said Ben. We left, she said, as if he should have remembered, because people like that are dangerous. She peeked through the blinds. Ben wanted to know what she meant by dangerous. I can't believe everyone's falling for it. Bless their hearts. Bless all of their hearts. Suddenly she gasped and flew away from the blinds. She walked toward her bedroom, and Ben wondered if the priest saw her spine. We're Americans, she said. This is ridiculous. And I'll stop there. So I guess the journey for this book was always, I guess, something I always wanted to write, but I didn't know how. On the one hand, my parents never told me about the Vietnamese refugee experience. On the other, I never really learned anything about the Vietnamese American experience. Growing up, Vietnam was equated in America with the war. All the books that I've read that touch on the Vietnam War, like The Things They Carry, for example. So I think it was a wonderful book, a great book that I feel really influenced me. It didn't show, I couldn't see myself in it. On the flip side, in movies, the Vietnamese people were always voiceless. I didn't see people like me, people like my parents and their stories about their escape, which I felt was honestly a more compelling story, at least from my point of view, than a coming of age story of a young American man in a foreign country. Again, just from my perspective. So it wasn't until like I was in undergrad that I actually read a book by a Vietnamese author. It was Monkey Bridge by Lan Cao. And I think people have called it like the first Vietnamese American novel. And it was then that I really felt like I can like write it. The problem is I didn't know how you could become a writer. I was actually my undergrad, I got a sociology degree. I was studying sociology and LGBT studies. I didn't even know English or creative writing was an option. I feel like at my school, you chose English as a major, or it's where people put you when you can't really decide, because I guess it's a very useful degree. But that's another discussion. And it wasn't until I graduated that I saw like a post for a workshop with the Lambda Literary workshops. I applied, somehow I got in. And from there, I kind of learned more about how to be a writer, got into an MFA program. And I guess throughout the 3 years I was in that MFA program, I really honed the craft of writing. But I think what I learned from my writing, from my experience there is, I guess I'll dwindle it down to maybe 3 lessons, is to persist, is to push through any criticism. For example, during my MFA program, a writer, a famous writer who I'll keep nameless, actually told me not to write anymore. He told me that I was basically wasting my time writing this book that eventually became published. Needless to say, that was very disheartening. I was really angry at that, but I think I'm the kind of person who kind of want to show people that I can do whatever they tell me not to do. So I continue writing. So I think that the one thing that separates like a writer, a published writer, or just a writer in general from a non-writer is that persistent to just keep on writing. A lot of it is just sitting down and actually doing the work, compared to someone who might just say, ooh, I wish I can write a book. If only I had the time. Honestly, no one really has the time unless you carve out time to make it. And I think that's one of the main things I learned is you have to persist, and you also have to make the time to write. On the flip side, you have to know your limitations. You have to learn how to take critiques. I think the workshop really helped me with that, especially someone who didn't come from an English writing workshop background. It was an eye-opening experience to have people kind of tell me how can I improve my writing. But I think at the same time, you have to know if what they tell you is right for your story, what you're writing, your poems, your novel. So it's kind of balance between knowing when you need help and knowing about the story, the work that you want to do. And I guess my last lesson is to read widely. I came from an MFA program that was really connected to their MA program in English literature, and we had to take classes not only in creative writing but also like 18th century literature, literary theory. And I think that really taught me to kind of led me back to why I liked reading in the first place. My first books that I really loved were like sci-fi books that were kind of frowned upon, I felt, in the larger literary writing community. But I think just having that love for literature from a place that other people don't, I guess, respect kind of made me really open my eyes to like, I should read everything, not just like sci-fi fantasy, but also the more literary serious stuff, but also plays, poetry, um, what have you. So because you can learn from different things, and you won't know your limits until you read widely. So I think being in a program that's connected with an MA program or PhD program, something where you're in contact with, I guess, scholars as well. I think that really helped me be in an environment that pushed me to read beyond, I guess, my comfort zone. So I guess you can talk, Megan, about any questions.
All right, well, firstly, I mean, definitely deserve a round of applause for the reading and for the amazing advice that you've already given to us. So we very appreciate that. And here we unmute and give real applause so you can actually hear it. Yeah. Yay. Yes, that's one thing that we miss about these live events is though the hand clapping emojis are fun and they're useful, it's not the same as actually, getting that sense of the sound. So thank you, for that, for reading the excerpt and for starting us off with some very sound advice for writers and even non-writer scholars as well. I want to circle back to one of the first things that you said, Eric, about kind of the impetus in writing this novel. And I agree with some of the comments here that whoever told you to stop writing, I know they shall remain nameless, but boo to them, because I mean, Things We Lost to the Water is such a wonderful, wonderful book. And it reminded me a lot of Latium Twee's The Gangster We're All Looking For. She was part of we have a series called One Book, One San Diego. And she was a featured book for that series several years ago. But just the idea of kind of humanizing this experience, or the Vietnamese immigrant experience. And because she talked about her impetus for writing the book, and that, seeing all these flat characters portrayed, and really anything that had any connection with Vietnam was sort of connected to the war in some way. And so the people were like in the periphery, and sort of bringing them to the forefront and really creating these very round characters. And I think we really see that in your novel. And I'm going to open it up for other questions in just a minute, but I wanted to ask just about sort of how the creation of these characters came about, because I think it's so crucial that you have all three points of view in the story to really create such a nuanced narrative. So if you could talk to us a little bit, Eric, about creating the characters, or a little bit more about creating the characters.
Yeah, so I guess my first intention of writing this book was really to tell the mother's story. I felt like in my head, like telling one story, having like one timeline in a way, would help me focus. So like I kind of brought in her son characters to kind of tell her story. I feel like what people, their view of you tells a lot about who you are as a person, especially because like a person is they only know so much about themselves. They're not able to see how they interact with other people, how they really actually reflect to their surroundings. So I felt like incorporating the son's perspective would really like illuminate her as a character. But I felt like once I added them in, they had like their own stories to tell. So I kind of just made more of their like story, developed more of their characters. And to my surprise, I felt like it kind of just came together, their perspective, kind of a puzzle. I feel like the book is kind of like almost like a cube in a way. Like you have one side of the story, and then you flip to the other side, you see the same story, but from a different perspective. It's the same cube, just a different perspective. And I think, I guess I was trying to explore this idea of being a refugee in New Orleans specifically, but seeing the multitudes of that experience and what that could mean to different people in different generations, which is basically what the book eventually became. We have the mother who is I guess, the first generation who just had her, she's an adult, she came here as an adult and kind of have to start her life together all over again. We have the first son, kind of 1.5 generation, who has like one foot in the old world, another foot in the new world. And we have the second son, who is kind of like the second generation, who is totally Americanized. And I think each perspective, in a way, kind of represents different ways to look at the immigrant refugee experience in the story.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to that. So I want to open it up now to others who have some questions. So feel free to use the little hand raise function or to put your question in the chat, and we'll get to as many as possible in the time that we have allotted. I see Viviana's hand up first. So let's begin with you, Viviana.
Hi, sorry if it's loud, I'm gonna copy you. But I just wanted to ask, first of all, very nice to meet you. You're a fantastic writer. I love your book. But I wanted to ask, what was the thought process behind leaving a lot of the words untranslated? I really admired you for that detail because I've seen it in other books, but I've never been on the outside of that. So it was a really good experience to have.
So the question was, what was my decision, my thought process around leaving words untranslated in the book? Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Great. Okay. So I guess on the one hand, like there wasn't any real thought process around it. Like I wanted to embed the reader into like the rhythms of this family, their daily lives, and like I just thought back to my own childhood, like what was like the exchange of information really like in my childhood home. And it was really this bilingual place. My parents would, for example, speak Vietnamese to me. I would speak English back to them, though I understood them in Vietnamese. And it was just that exchange. And also like talking to my siblings, we would like code switch. We would like in the middle of a sentence in English, we would say like a word in Vietnamese, and that just really felt natural to us. So I felt like it was just natural to include that in like my characters and the conversations and really the lives that they live, the texture of their family life, their home life, really. But I also think for me, it was kind of a way to kind of immerse the readers themselves into this world. It's kind of a disorientation of like, you have the immigrant in a new community, there is this orientation. So I kind of want to reflect that disorientation as well into the reader who might not know any Vietnamese, because I feel like books, especially books from about immigrants, are kind of this cross-cultural kind of thing. You're reading the experience of an immigrant, so you should feel that disorientation in a way as well. And I think just having those Vietnamese words in there kind of helps with like, I guess, that feeling that I want to get across. I have to like dial it back a little bit, because I think in my first or second draft, like I wrote like half a chapter on Vietnamese. I felt like in my head that was cool, that was kind of radical, but it didn't help in the long run. So I cut that part out. But otherwise, I think I didn't really get any pushback, especially from my editors and agent. I feel like I've heard like horror stories of like writers being asked to like translate all the words, have a glossary, footnotes to translate what they wrote. But like I always thought that was really it really messed with the flow of the reading, because you have to flip back and forth. And I think just including the language there just makes it more natural. Readers can learn by context, the way immigrants do learn by context as well. And if all else fails, you can Google it as well. So there wasn't any pushback, and I'm really glad about that.
Great, thank you. Good question, Viviana, and thank you for the response. And good to know that you didn't get a lot of pushback, because I've heard horror stories as well. And it just feels, I try to imagine the novel without any of that language and without any of the Vietnamese, and it would just, it would have definitely a different tone, a different feeling. All right, I think Nigel was up next with the question.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I really loved your work. My question's kind of building a little bit off the question Professor Marshall asked, and just around the multiple POVs. I just thought it was so amazing and well done in terms of how you manage the different character arcs within that, and then also connected them to a cohesive plot. And so I was just curious if you did any writing outside of the book in either outlines or character maps or anything like that to help you kind of manage the story.
Well, I'm not like really a planner when it comes to writing. Like I don't really outline like writing this book. Like I knew like how it would begin and how it would end. So like I feel like it was for me just how to connect those 2 points and what would come naturally between those points to get to the last point that I want to get to. But I definitely did write like stuff that didn't get into the book that just helped with the character developments. There were chapters, like whole chapters that were on like 20 or so pages that I wrote to better understand my characters that I actually thought like would be part of the book eventually. But at the end of like a couple of drafts, like it felt like it didn't belong in the book. Felt like more like backstory than anything else. But I feel like writing those chapters just really helped me understand my character. I think like to get into the mindset to understand where they come from, to fill in the gaps that are especially part of this book, because like we jump around between characters a whole lot. There's going to be gaps, stuff that we don't see in their lives between chapter to chapter. And I think just writing those extra chapters, those I guess in between chapters, just for my own sake, even if no one else ever sees them, that really helped me understand these characters. I think once I got down into, I think at the end of the day, I got like, at the end of the whole process, there were like 8 drafts. I think around drafts 4 or 5, I started actually using like a spreadsheet kind of thing to like just remember which chapter belongs to who. Meanwhile, like behind the scenes, like what the other characters are doing, those are like the chapters that I didn't include. And then like I just told you, they were just like character sketches, for example, and what they're doing during that time. I think I stole this idea from Karente Yamashita, who says that for one of her books, she did use like a spreadsheet to organize a chapter. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I tried that as well. And that was mostly helpful. I just feel like I'm not really an organized person in the first place. So I don't feel like I feel like the magic for me of writing is gone once you organize too much. I feel like there's this like writerly pleasure you get when you surprise yourself. Like, yeah, I think that those are the moments when writing is like really fun and cool. It's like when you think like you're going one direction, but then all of a sudden you're writing and then like pop, like something happens that you didn't really expect it to happen. And then like that's like the coolest part of writing, honestly.
Right, thank you. I mean, you say you're not a super organized person, but using some spreadsheets, and I mean, I think that sounds pretty organized to me, Eric. I feel like you know, I that might even be beyond what I see myself capable of. So very much a thumbs up on that one. What else? Other questions? I know we have them. I thought there was another hand that was up and then disappeared. And remember, you can throw them into the chat as well. While I'm waiting for that, I was wondering if you could also speak a little bit about just the motif of water. Did you always know that that was going to be something central to the novel, or did it kind of begin with, with the mother story and then maybe kind of unfold from there?
Yeah, the water motif didn't come until later. I didn't like consciously put it in. I felt like I wrote it when I wrote the first draft when I was in Louisiana, and I feel like if you're writing a book about Louisiana, you have to learn about the culture and like what I guess just learned from osmosis, to use like a water pun. It's like water is very important to the culture there. Like as a graduate student, I taught like English 101, and there were a lot of students who came from like families who are like, I guess, oyster shuckers, or they find oysters for harvest. I guess you call that. I should know the word for that, but I don't. They live on the water essentially, and water is so important down there that I felt like water should be mentioned here and there. But then even at that point, I just like felt like that was just part of the setting. It wasn't until I guess several drafts in that I got like I connected dots that the dots that water is like this thing that keeps on showing up, like literally like in the story it's there. And then it became served as like a symbol eventually. I saw like the way the dots connected, and I think around halfway through all my drafts, like 4 or 5, like I saw it and like I leaned into it. I guess which is just to say that you don't have to come into a work knowing what themes, what motifs you're trying to explore. I think for me, especially, writing is a way to explore questions that I might have. And I think like motifs and that stuff kind of shows up along the way. And it's through the revision process that you kind of find them and see what you can use. And like I said, like lean into them, pull those motifs, that symbolism out, and see what you can do with it. See if it works as a theme, as motif. And if it does, great. If it does not, that's fine. You're still writing drafts. I think the one thing that like a lot of writers kind of stumble on is like drafting. You think that it has to be perfect. You need to have a theme, you need to have the symbols, you need to have motifs all in there. But for me, it's really about experimentation. It doesn't work. No one's going to see it. Like no one's going to see like draft 4, draft 1, draft 2, and you can make all the mistakes there. And I think that gives me a type of freedom when writing to really develop themes, motifs, symbolism, whatever in the book.
Well, I think like you said earlier, part of that writing process has to be the magic that comes along, that it's not always about the outline or the spreadsheets. Some of those things just become part of that organic process. And that's maybe the fun part is writing around a question and seeing where it takes you. Okay, I see, yes, Anna has a hand up. Anna, what's your question?
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for coming tonight and reading from this book. I was very curious about your research process because so much of this book takes place in the past and in Vietnam. Did you use a lot of your personal history? Was there a lot of secondary sources that you used? What did it look like to do the research for this book?
I think for me, it was like a hodgepodge of research techniques and sources. I mean, like some stuff, like but very little, is like from my own life. Like one of the characters, the gay, writerly kind of person. I'm the gay, writerly kind of person. There's a Vietnamese gang in the book. I grew up around an area with a lot of Vietnamese gangs. I think that's the only details of my own life that I kind of put in, but they're not like my biography, just detailed. Other than that, it was I had to research the Vietnamese refugee experience and then also New Orleans because I'm not from New Orleans. So for the Vietnamese refugee experience, I kind of read a lot of books, watched a lot of documentary, just really because for a lot of people that kind of history would come from the parents, but my parents didn't really talk about their experience a lot of. I think that's really common in like refugee families with the trauma of fleeing. There's no want, desire to return to the past, especially if it's traumatic in some way. So I read a lot of books, like I mentioned, like Wang Gao's book was the first book that I read by a Vietnamese American person. And like, that was, I guess, one of my source materials. I read other books like there's Stealing Buddha's Dinner by Nguyen, Beth Nguyen, which is about growing up in the Midwest, the 80s, Vietnamese American, and a whole bunch of other books. I also read a lot of like oral histories of like Vietnamese refugees who came to the US just to get, I guess, more of that more of a raw experience I could read compared to something that's more sculpted that you would get from the writer, because oral histories are usually just people talking to an interviewer. So that's how I got my history in the book in terms of the refugee experience. I also watched some old YouTube clips that helped me with like learning more about Vietnam, the 70s and the 80s. In terms of researching New Orleans, I went to my MFA program was in Lake Charles, which is about 3 hours away from New Orleans. So I found myself like going to New Orleans a whole lot. At first, it was just like fun trips. Like, I mean, it's right there, why not? But eventually, like I learned more about the city, about the Vietnamese community there, and I just I went around with my writer's notebook and like tried to take notes, like street names, store names, where stuff are located, and I didn't think that in the long run, I don't think that was really useful, because you don't read a book to really know what to know, to learn where a street is, to learn where a store is. What you're going for when you're reading a book is, I guess, the emotional truth of a place. And I think just being around New Orleans, talking to the people there, especially the Vietnamese community there, really helped me get a feel of the culture there, but also the people there, how they feel about the community, the history of themselves in that community. And it brought like a layer that you can only get if you go to the place, if you pay attention to a place, that you can't get from, I would say, like reading a book or memorizing a map of a place. So I think that's where my sociological background really helped, is just observing and also just talking to people, doing, I guess, field interviews in a way, though not in a very scientific way that one would learn from a sociology program, just learning from people, being open-minded around people and their stories.
Thank you. And thank you, Anna, for that great question. I was concerning what you said about, that it's sort of common for refugees maybe to not speak about their experiences or not kind of share that with the family. And, and just kind of knowing that a little bit of the book is somewhat, you have some details that we pull from your autobiographical experience, as writers certainly tend to do, write what you know. So I'm wondering, has your family read the book? If so, what do they think?
So my parents have not read the book, mostly because they don't speak English. They don't read English very well. So there's like a gap there. If they do know about it, they're proud of me. It's just like, I'm just waiting for a Vietnamese translation. So if anyone knows anybody, look me up.
Yes.
My brother has read it. I feel like he's like the #1 fan. Like he's known like I wanted to be a writer for a very long time, so he cheered me on. So there's that, but I feel like he's kind of biased. But I think I hope that they're honest, and he's honest in liking it. I feel like at the end of the day, like this book is kind of my homage to my family, and what they've been through. I feel like there's a lot of like people in my generation, I guess the second generation, who were born here in the US. There's like this gap between parents and the child about like what happened, what is keep hidden in the way between each other's history. I think this is my way to explore that gap. And if I don't find an answer, maybe I'm leaning towards something. Like I said, I think writing is at least my way to hone down to a question and try to answer that question. It might not be factually correct, but it's, for me, emotionally correct. I feel like writing this book was like a very personal journey because I needed to know what happened to my parents' generation in a way. And writing it just made me feel more comfortable with knowing and also not knowing that history. And I think I'm in, like, emotionally and identity wise, I think like I needed to write this book to I guess I wouldn't say like work out through my trauma. I feel like that because I haven't been through war, but I guess work out my identity, my family history, at the end, my own story, even though I've written a totally fictional book.
Well, I think an author that we had earlier in this semester, in giving some advice, just said, write the book that you feel like you need to write. And I think when you really pursue that and you're passionate about that, that comes through in the writing, and it certainly did in your novel. Megan had a question in the chat, and she said, you include some humorous moments despite the trials this family faces. Did you always plan to have some moments of humor, or did the story evolve that way?
I think the story, like, it just evolved to have humor. I don't really consider myself a humorous person. Like I try to write like I have a comedy novel that I want to write, but I just can't get to it. I'll get there eventually, but like, the humor that you find in the book, I feel like it was there accidentally. I didn't do it on purpose, but I feel like if you're writing about trauma, I feel like there's a point where you have to add humor, you have to add light moments in there, just because like a person can't take a lot of trauma, even a reader can't take a lot of trauma, just because trauma is exhausting. I think just like the moments of humor is just me trying to almost lighten the load of this very serious story, but also show, like, I guess the almost humanity of my characters. I mean, these characters are not just a trauma, they are other things as well. They have different experiences, they have lighthearted funny moments, they have serious moments. So I think it's the way humor found itself in the book is that I was balancing these characters and trying to make them feel more human or seem more human.
Yeah, I think the reader certainly appreciates those moments of levity. And as you mentioned, we need that when we're dealing with such difficult trauma. And I think that that's natural of life too, is that we have those light moments mixed in with those dark moments. Oh yeah, Karen has a hand up. Go ahead, Karen.
Hi. So I noticed that at the end of your book, you leave it rather open-ended with the mom answering the phone to Ben. And I was wondering if you always meant to keep it open-ended for the reader or if you had alternative endings.
That was mostly always been the ending. I feel like there should be like narrative of me writing this, like the ending just popped up. Like I said, like at the beginning, like earlier in this talk, like I kind of I knew what the beginning was. I knew the end, like I knew exactly, like, in my head, I knew exactly what the ending would look like almost like a movie in my head. And I was just writing to that, like I will get to that ending no matter what. And a lot of the writing was like trying to fill in the gaps in the middle, like all those pages, 100 or so pages between chapter 1 and chapter 2, or the last chapter. And it was more of a challenge to write everything in the middle to make sure I get to the ending I wanted, because I had that in mind. I kind of had that in stone, like I really wanted that ending. So I feel like, yeah, I always knew that, and it was a challenge of making everything in the middle of the book seem to build up to that point, to make that ending feel inevitable, that that ending could only be that way. And in terms of open-endedness of the ending, I feel like I always wanted that open-ended. I feel like to make it more close-ended would kind of negate a lot of the themes that I was exploring, which is of like this feeling of disorientation, this immigrant refugee experience of the ability to be the sense of there's no closure. I feel like there in real life there's not always a sense of closure, and I wanted to get that across as well in this narrative about refugees, about immigrants. And I think that just I wanted this book to, I guess, be kind of true to life in a way, and I think that's why I kind of made it through different perspectives as well, because I think that kind of reflects truth better, if that makes sense. So I think that open-ended ending is a contribution to that truthfulness of life I was trying to get at.
Thank you for that question. And I think too, just like I said, removing some of the language, the Vietnamese from it, it would give the novel a totally different tone. And I feel like ending on any other note, or if things were sort of tied up in like a neat little saccharine bow, it just wouldn't have that same effect. So very happy that, again, some editor didn't try to tell you to write a follow-up or something like that, an epilogue. All right, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience working with diaCRITICS, and just because it seemed, it's such an amazing organization and journal, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your work as an editor there.
Yeah, so I was brought on as the editor there, I think last year. Yeah, probably last year. It's been a long 2 years.
Yes.
But basically, before that, I was basically contributing writer for it. It's, if you don't know, diaCRITICS is this blog highlighting culture makers, artists, writers of the Vietnamese diaspora, as well as Southeast Asian diaspora. So anyone really, not even within the diaspora, just sometimes in, I guess, mainland Asia as well. So Vietnam, Cambodia, where have you, in Southeast Asia. If this is Southeast Asia, we would like to know about it. Basically, my work is, I guess, highlighting artists, culture makers, like I said, who are doing cool work, telling their stories. I think the model is really behind what Viet Thanh Nguyen talked about. He's the founder of the blog, of the publication, and he really promoted this idea of narrative plentitude, of there being all sorts of narratives for, I guess, the class of people, particular people. It means to expand what one would have in mind about a particular population. So in the case of, I guess, Vietnamese Americans, there's always this narrative of this war narratives that there's a war and we're always on the vet shadow of the war, which is true in a way, but there's so much more to the Vietnamese American experience, the Vietnamese diaspora experience than the war. Their experiences outside the war, experiences that have nothing to do with the Vietnam War, especially as we move forward with the generations. So I think what we're looking for, always looking for, is that diversity of voices, that narrative plenitude of different types of stories. So we've published stories in poetry about war, but also stories just about motherhood, poems about, there's a poem about climate change, or one about climate change coming soon. We published a story about crabs. It's weird, but it was good, a good story. So I think my role as editor there is just to expand the definition of what is Vietnamese American or Southeast Asian American stories, just to break that stereotype that a group of people only have one story to tell. And I think Chimamanda Adichie, I think I pronounced her name correctly. She says like the danger of one story. If one story can kind of dislodge that stereotype, I think that's really powerful. I think that's basically the impetus behind diaCRITICS, is just to show the wide range of stories and also arts that people in the Southeast diaspora is doing. If that answers your question.
Yes, and more. Thank you. And I love that that TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story. I teach it often. It's very powerful. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's like one of the most widely watched TED Talks, I think, in the history of TED, which is a big deal. So you know that it's definitely powerful. Well, I maybe wanted to conclude on a question. So earlier when you were giving us great advice, you mentioned that it's very important to read widely. And I think this, kind of connects with the mission of diaCRITICS, right? This idea of narrative plentitude. And in that spirit, I'm wondering if maybe you could give us some recommendations as to, I know you've mentioned a couple books that really stuck with you. I think it was Monkey Bridge, Stealing Buddha's Dinner. But is there anything else maybe even more recently that's come across your desk that you feel like we should add to our reading lists?
Let me think. I would say one writer that comes to mind is Chung Lei. He's a graphic novelist. His debut graphic novel, I think it's called The Magic Fish. He's doing interesting things with mythology and queerness, and putting that all in a graphic comic book form. It's like when I say read widely, I would include like comic books in that. It's like someone growing up in like with comic books. I felt that was a really easy transition for me. Other writers who do an exciting thing, I would say Ocean Room, who writes poetry but also has written a novel. He's doing interesting things with language. I feel like he's kind of almost experimental the way that he sometimes plays with poetry, but not too experimental as to make people afraid of what they're reading. And I guess on the flip side of that is like Hua Ling, who's, I think her latest book, 1,000 Times You Lose Your Treasure, is like shortlisted for the National Book Award, and her stuff is very kind of more experimental, I guess more difficult to read. You have to really work out the meaning of her work, which I think is really worth it. Another writer is Vicky Now, who writes a whole range of stuff. She writes poetry, fiction, and she's written drama too. So like when I said read widely, she writes widely as well. And her stuff is pretty experimental too, I would say. And they're really strange, kind of strange fiction. And that's like top of my head. I probably have like hundreds of reading recommendations. I would say there are a lot of good writers out there. Just look around and ask your library or bookstore for recommendations. I would say they're good sources to trust.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. We actually had Vicky Now was a featured writer for the Living Writers series a couple years ago, right before we went into the shutdown. Cool. And yeah, her work is amazing. And Night Sky with Exit Wounds. I mean, Ocean Vuong is one of my favorite collections as of late. So amazing recommendations. Thank you, Eric. Because everybody, winter break is coming up, so you better add to those reading lists because you're going to have a little time for that. All right, well, let's thank Eric so much for staying up super late to be with us this evening. We so appreciate your time. Feel free to let him hear it.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. It was great.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate your gracious responses, all of your wonderful advice, and the solid reading list that we have to go forward from this evening. And thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you for the final event of the semester, which is next Wednesday, the 17th, with poet Nicole Seeley. So everybody be safe until then. Thank you again, Eric. It was lovely meeting with you and speaking with you. We're going to try to get you physically out to San Diego in the near future.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks for your questions.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great evening and a great weekend.